going to just say a few words. I know most of you know Mel, so probably we don't need to do any long introductions, but Mel has worked as an independent studio artist since graduating from the Canberra School of Art in 2000. And she has been a lecturer there. Earlier this year, she received her PhD from her alma mater based on research she carried out at the Australian National University's Glass Workshop and at Bullseye in Portland, Oregon. Mel is a award-winning artist who in 2020 won the Tom Malone Prize, a prestigious award through which a work is acquired each year into the collection of the National Gallery of Western Australia. Douglas received major other awards, including the Runnymede Glass Prize in 2002 and the International Young Glass Artists Award in 2007 from the Ebeltoft Museum of Glass in Denmark. I will also say that today, out of the blue, I received in my email, I subscribed to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary word of the day. And today, when I opened their word of the day, the word of the day was kiln. And I thought actually that they had some very clever algorithm that was tracking my emails. But when I went to Google just to check that, and I Googled Merriam-Webster's word of the day, it was in fact, word of the day for October 15th is kiln. And the dictionary defines kiln as an oven, furnace, or heated enclosure used for processing a substance by burning, firing, or drying. They say that the word kiln was kindled in Old English as a bundle of C-Y-L-N. Unlike many words that descend from Old English, kiln is not ultimately Germanic, but was borrowed from Latin. And its original meaning is tied to the word culina, meaning kitchen, which I thought was really fascinating and so apropos. It was like the universe was sending us this message. So anyway, here we are. Mel, can I just ask you then to take it from here? And before we get going though, I'm gonna just say one thing. If you have questions, please post them in the chat. You can write them, or if you wanna raise your hand, we will also call on people at the end of the presentation. Okay, so Mel, tell us where you are and show us where you are.
Okay, so I'm here today in Canberra. It's early morning, it's 8:05, so sun has just risen. Behind the camera, I have my lovely Lewis Grant, who is also a graduate from school, and he's going to be helping today. I'm at the Canberra Glassworks. So as Katya said, I was awarded my PhD earlier this year, and I do have a small studio, and we have an image of that we'll show later, that I do all of my engraving from and some of the smaller, more finishing processes. But at the moment, I'm actually situated in the Canberra Glassworks making most of my work. So we're in this glorious building, and we'll have a little walk around in a second, just on the first floor, which was the first powerhouse or power station for Canberra. So it's an open access studio, so people can rent spaces and rent time, rent equipment. I am the next visiting fellow coming up here. So for the next 6 months, starting the beginning of next year, I'm going to be ensconced in here, and I'll be making majority of my work from this space. So this space really came out of a need for a lot of...
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Can you just tell us, so is Glassworks open right now?
It is open, yes. So you'll often see people sort of walking through. There's a whole team in the hot shop working at the moment. People are starting to arrive for work. So yes, it is open.
Great.
Yeah. So most things in Australia are open to the public. Again, we've been pretty lucky with COVID. So we are all social distancing. The ANU has very different situation going on, but majority of people can work freely here. We do at times have a bit of a close down if there's little outbreaks in certain states, but we've been pretty good. So yeah, at the moment I have a small studio space at the back, but I just thought I would give you a quick walk around. I put a few things out which talk a little bit about my process, and I thought that would be a nice way to sort of ease into looking at the works that I have at Hella. It's really hard to have an exhibition that you can't physically go and see, and you know, I've really been looking forward to showing this body of work with Hella. So I do feel very sad not to be there in person, but to have this opportunity to talk to you and to build this relationship with Doug and Katya is really important. So I'm absolutely thrilled. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
Pleasure. So you can see the original building here is as it was, and the glassworks has just been built in a shell. It's a protected building, so everything that was here when we took over the building 13 years ago, and I remember that because it was the same time that I had my son Luca, has remained as is, and we've sort of built the infrastructure within this building. So a little cold shop here, which is where I work most days, and then we have a beautiful bank, and this is just one level of the glassworks. Then we have a beautiful bank of kilns back here. Most of the questions that I've been getting about my work in the last little while is about the drawing process or the printing processes that I've been working with. I'll talk more in depth about kind of conceptual framework around my body of work, but just to briefly touch on that, what I'm interested in is thinking about using glass as a drawing material. And I like to work with glass in the many different ways that it can be worked. So most people specialize in a particular area. They either blow glass or kiln form. But what I found in my practice is that I have tried to keep all of those areas open. I constantly try and learn new techniques or experiment with new ways of actually drawing with glass. So through doing that, I still work in the hot shop with my team, Annette Blair, Scott Chaseling, Belinda Toll. And I also do a lot of kiln forming in many different ways. So kiln casting, kiln forming, and now some printing processes as well. And I've also been experimenting with using things like a vitrograph, which is a small kiln, which you use sort of heat and gravity to form glass as well. So we'll start over here, and I thought I would just run quickly through my printing process from woe to go, and then I just show you a little bit of how I make my solid compact forms as well, and then we could ease into the exhibition. Okay.
Great.
So these are actually drawings that are in the show at the moment. So this is for the flat printed drawings that I make. So I firstly make my own drawings. So they're all hand drawings. So there's a certain gauge of pen that I need to use so that I get enough thickness in the lines so that the glass powder can actually fall through. Once I've finished my drawings, I photocopy the drawings and oil them so they become these sort of translucent drawings. What I'm thinking about with these drawings is creating matrices that I can overlay and create almost third spaces as well. So once they're oiled, I can sort of see how I can position them and play around with different compositions. Once I have these, I take them over to Megalo Printing Studio, which is actually just the next building across from us. And I've been working with the team over there, and we prep and get ready my screen. So this is a screen I have here. So the screen is coated in this emulsion, this purple emulsion. So without this, it is totally covered in that. And then I lay the screen down on top of one of my oiled drawings, and a light source comes through and actually burns away where my drawings were. So I'm left with areas that don't have any emulsion. So where the emulsion is, it actually just clogs up the pores of the screen. And where you can see this transparency through here, that is where the glass powder is then going to sift through onto the kiln shelf. Once I've done that, and I'm going to show you the process over in the kiln. Am I going too fast?
This is good right now.
Okay.
There has been one suggestion that people are having a hard time hearing you, Mel, but towards the end here, it was a little bit better, I think.
Okay. Maybe I'll get Lewis to come a little closer to me. Is that better?
It's fine for me. How is everybody else doing? Okay, it seems better.
Good.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. So once I have my screen, I then go take it over to the kiln. So I've positioned, this is a similar screen which I've positioned into the kiln, just a top hat kiln. And what I'm going to use is just this fine glass powder. What I've discovered through this process is that there's about 7 different grades at least of like the size of the particles of glass. So I really, from a container like this, there's maybe a 7th that will actually filter through the screen itself. So I am working on a process where I actually grind some of this powder down into a finer particle so I can use more and I have less waste. So I usually end up with a whole bunch of powder that I actually can't pop through the screen. I have to wear my mask.
And so, Mel, when the powder doesn't go through, can you reuse that glass?
Yeah, so what I've been doing is I've just been kind of keeping it in its own canister, and then I can't use it for printing, but I can use it for other purposes. And I've also been donating it as well to people that are using lots of powder. So it doesn't matter for doing other kind of kiln forming processes, it can absolutely be used, but just because of the mesh size of the screen, which is fairly fine, it's not suitable for my purposes. So I'm going to be just screening this directly onto the kiln shelf. The kiln shelf's been primed, but there's no glass underneath the this powder drawing.
We love seeing this being made right in front of our eyes.
So I'll be a bit naughty with my mask off. So I've worked out how much glass I actually need. So I've sort of managed to work out how much I can actually put on here with minimal waste. And I know that because I've got a lot more area, sort of line work through the middle and through the top, that I'm going to need more powder towards the front than I do towards the back. Usually from every print that I take, I maybe get 1 out of 20 that I can use, and that's only because I've really kind of honed this process. The first time I made prints was when I started this body of research at Bullseye Glass, and I'd taken a few to SOFA, and the curator had seen them and she said, "Oh, I'm really interested. Could you make me some bigger ones to go with a particular body of work?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And she said, "We need them within a month." And I said, "That will be fine." And so I went back and I did my drawings and I made my screens. And to get the 3 prints that she wanted, I think I worked out that I did 180 firings to get those 3 prints. So it was really a matter of like working out the right glass to use, the right mesh of the screen, the gauge of the line. So it took a lot of kind of experimentation, and it still does. There's so many variables that either make this work or don't make it work. So it's always exciting and it always keeps me on my toes.
And do you notice if, you know, I know that you, that I originally became aware of these when they were just with the black, but
Yeah.
I know that you've also now made ones with color. Is there a difference between how they work when you use the black color or any other particular color?
Yes, so every type of glass has a different viscosity. So it's much easier to work with the stiffer colors like the whites and things like that, just because they kind of hold their form a little bit. But that also means that I need to change my firing schedule as well. So with every small change that I make, so every color change I make, I then need to change firing schedules, the kilns that I'm firing in. Sometimes I need to change the density of the line too. So a lot of the lighter colors, you need to have a thicker line to get a really strong bold image as well. So with a shift in color, there is always many shifts that have to happen in the making process as well.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to just run this glass through and then we can have a look. So there's no guarantee it's going to be perfect, but fingers crossed.
We're not looking for perfect. We're just looking for what it does.
You can talk, Lewis.
That's the styrofoam you're using.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So I'm putting the smallest amount of pressure on there just because there's so much flex in the screen. If I push down too much, the surface of this screen is going to touch onto the glass powder, and then I'll get a little indentation. So any kind of movement that touches that glass drawing that's underneath is going to actually shift and flatten, and I'll have to start again. What I need to design is some sort of vacuum that I can remove all the powder that doesn't work and then reuse it. But I'd always have some sort of contaminants from the kiln shelf or something else that's happened. So I've got little levels underneath. I hope
that all the technical types on this talk are listening, because here are the opportunities. We need to invent this piece of equipment.
Yeah. We need Jeremy Lapisto.
All right.
So, and I have to lift it directly off. I can't sort of shuffle it at all because there is the possibility of it moving underneath too. So.
Wow.
So I include a little registration mark so you can just see the little peaks of powder.
Yeah.
And then I would go in and do multiple passes. So I would move my screen around and do an opposing print as well. But that is the process. This is pretty good. There's a couple of areas that are a little too thin through here. So this is then fired, and I've got one that's sort of fired over here that we can have a look at. So then I end up, and this is a white underneath and then a grey on the top. So then I end up with these quite amazing sort of flexible drawings. So I'm always baffled by glass, but this is one of the times when I'm just, amazed at the stability and durability of the material. And I'll talk a little bit about it a bit more when I talk about my work, but I was very interested in a lot of research done by anthropologist Tim Ingold, who talks about, the ability of, like, can line exist without a surface, or does line...
Had a question.
Oh.
So someone said, do you do the opposing layers after one layer is fired?
No. So the opposing layer, we're going back to the kiln now, the opposing layer is always laid down in the kiln at the same time. I did experiment with layering, doing multiple singular firings and then layering them on top. What I found was it did build up a beautiful three-dimensional image, but the lines weren't knitted together, and that's sort of what I'm looking for almost a body, an object that has a body that is knitted together as one. It becomes very, it sort of flattens it out and becomes more two-dimensional when I layer them after firing. And also the second firing of these often makes the print start to crawl a little bit, so they start to sort of shrink in the second firing as well. So it's good to get it all down in one firing. And sometimes I do get chemical reactions that happen between certain colors too. So if I use a very stiff white and a black, often it's very hard to fire them together, to get them both to fire to the right sort of consistency, if I may. So then I have these beautiful sort of flexible drawings, and then I place glue on the back, and then they're adhered to a paper.
And Mel, we've had questions about what kind of glue do you use in order for it to basically not leave any residue. Mm-hmm.
So I've started to use a rice paper glue. So after having some work in the Art Gallery of Western Australia, I started working with the conservators there. So for a time I was using some spray glues, and I was just a little bit worried about the longevity of them. So I'm using a rice paper glue at the moment, and just working out ways to actually get it to adhere to the glass without it breaking. So once you sort of get a tackiness on the back, the glass wants to come with you. So just finding ways to actually screen on glue on the back. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I screen on just with a little squeegee, and it, you know, I often get a lot of breakages that way too. Screening on the glue, and then I drop the paper down directly onto the glass. So if the paper touches the glass in one corner before it actually sits on the whole piece, that can also cause some cracking as well. So,
very tricky.
So many possibilities. It's very exciting, but so many possibilities of that.
So Mel, I'm sitting in front of the floor fold series, and I'm just curious, the folds then, are they're also made two moved passes at, you know, 2 positions each?
They're actually one pass. So that drawing was done in one pass.
Okay.
Yeah, so the folded drawing was actually just one. So I have experimented with, I've got 2 of those screens, and I have experimented with trying to get different colors on the back and the front, but that's still in
experimentation phase.
Experimental phase, yeah. So I just have a couple. So this is a couple of new pieces that I've just finished, which do have double colors. So one underneath, this is underneath, and this is on top, all done in the one firing. Mm-hmm. And you can see you get these beautiful kind of matrices of lines where, you know, areas are sort of knitting together. Mm-hmm. And I stick them down to a very thick, so it's a 640 GSM watercolor paper. So it's got a really nice sort of stable nature to it. So
beautiful. So is that 2 layers of a gray, or is it 4?
So this is 4 layers, 2 layers of white underneath, and then 2 layers of gray on top. And you start to see these sort of third, you know, it's very, very faint, but you start to see some of these third spaces appearing, which is what I've sort of become really interested in this body of work, is by using line in multiple layers and multiple fields, you can start to create these third spaces, which only really exist in space, or only really exist because you've got these 2 other elements as well. And this is another very simple one here. I included this one because around these corners here, you can see that there must have been 2 hotter areas in the kiln, and these areas are starting to sort of bunch up and create denser fields of color in the sides, which is really interesting. And this is sort of going to be my next direction, I think. So thinking about the way that, like, the density of line can create perspective as well, which I do in a lot of my solid works.
Yeah, it almost looks like this shading kind of idea.
Yeah, I think this is sort of where I'm going to head. You know, there's going to be more of a connection to the solid pieces next. So, and I think that Katya and I had a little discussion about it this morning. There is definitely a sort of knit between all of my areas of work, and I think that's because my overarching idea is the same, and because I am working through different techniques, I feel like one thing feeds onto the next, which is always really exciting. And by sort of taking small cues from what's happening in the work, it sort of gives me my next idea or next kind of venture to head forward through to. goes back.
That's fabulous.
So let's briefly talk about the solid work here. So it does start with singular sheets. So using singular sheets of bullseye. I cut them up. Usually these are around 14 to 15 layers of glass. So they become these big solid wedges. We put them in the kiln and take them up to 810, which is super hot. Richard Whiteley can probably, if he's in, can probably give us the Fahrenheit.
810 Celsius, right?
Yeah. And then once we've finished with these, the lovely Lewis, who's behind the camera, and I go downstairs, and there's a cold shop down there, and we use a lot of, we've actually started using a lot of hand tools to shape these. So we get a lot of pieces of steel just cut out on the water jet cutter, and I've been making these long kind of bars so that we can actually really get some of these angles precise, and then we shape these large blocks into these
Beautiful
forms. So we're using a lot of these to kind of get in and shape the sides, and then the longer bar to shape this top section. So because it's a wedge, you know, trying to get it to sit beautifully, and just making sure this line of the top actually matches its pair or doesn't have any lumps or bumps is how we've been doing it. I think it probably would be more economical and less arduous to just cast these, but the thing that I really love about using the sheet glass is that you get this sort of linear structure in the sides that you can see where the work has been made up from the sheets, and you also get these really interesting kind of bubble patterns within the work as well, which for glass blowing, people hate bubbles. You've got to try and avoid them at all costs. But I think there's something beautiful about the nature of the material that we're working with, and it shows a sense of sort of movement within the glass as well.
The great Czech caster Ivan Mareš always talks about the bubbles as being like the inner life of the glass.
They're really beautiful, and they do capture the light, and they do capture that sense of movement. So to get the wedges too, I also tilt my kiln shelf, so I am using heat and gravity in the kiln. So you can sort of see that pattern in the work as well, which I think they could be quite sterile if I started casting them with something that was bubble free. So I have a couple of pieces that are finished. So once we've finished all of our hand sanding, which usually takes hours and hours and hours, I then have these pristine pieces to work on, and then I use these very fine engraving tools.
Mm-hmm.
And I do all of this work at home now, so I take these back home. We just lost lights. And we engrave all of these, I engrave all of these lines, which give a sense of perspective and give those flat forms a three-dimensional sense as well. So I'm using notions of geometry and perspective to create that sense of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional surface. So, and I definitely think that this kind of idea is the next step in my prints as well.
Wonderful. Richard did chime in and say that 840 degrees Celsius was about 1550 Fahrenheit. Just so
I knew we could found a measure. Thank you very much. Right.
Okay.
Does anyone have one? Yeah.
I love the cooking show style of this. We went from the glass to the almost finished piece to the finished piece. Were it so?
I think it's really nice for people to actually see that there's a process, and that everything, and even though there is a very standardized process that I have with my work, there's always things that change every time I make something. There's always something that changes in the kiln, or something that I notice through that making process that kind of sparks something new. And that's what I really find really interesting about glass. It's one of those materials that you can never rely on to be exactly the same. Every batch is different. Every time you work with it, it's different. So there's always something that actually sparks some new idea or some new direction that you could possibly take, which can be infuriating at times. But most times, if you have the time and the patience to stop and actually look at the material and you understand what's happening with the material, you know, you can really see the beauty in it, and you're able to sort of, I think people are able to sort of harness that and use that within their practices as well.
Sounds great. So, so do you want to talk a little bit about the idea? What should we look at the show, or should we talk a little bit about the idea of the classifications that you came to in your thesis? Or
yes. So why don't we have a quick look at we've got one image of my home studio, so we can flick to that, and then maybe we could just start talking about my work in general, and then we can talk about the work in the show, because I think it relates to everything that we've discussed this morning.
We are going to, no, not there. Here. Okay, I'm gonna. Yeah. There we go.
So I have a very modest home studio. For me, it's a personal space to engrave. So I spend hours and hours and hours doing all of my surface work. And I have a kiln there as well. So I do a lot of sort of initial testing there. And I do a little bit of hand grinding at home too. But mainly that's a space for contemplation. So whenever I have anything blown or anything made, I'll take it back to that space before I bring it in here and get to work. So I think it's important, and I think most artists do have a space where they have a bit of privacy to work. So,
you know, I'm just gonna stop sharing for a moment, and I'm gonna reframe this from a different place here so that we can. There we go. Let's see if we can do this better. Is this better? Is everybody seeing the full screen now? Hopefully. Okay.
Yes, Katya, that's right.
Okay, great. Thank you. We are going to move. So Mel, I'm going to move now to the tracings image. Is that okay? Or should we move to the show image? Which would you like?
So we can move to tracings. Yes. So, in my statement, I've talked about objects and drawings often being seen as two separate entities. So within my work, I really try to interweave any creative possibilities that I might be able to sort of mesh between the two. So thinking about glass as a drawing material, what can it bring to the field of drawing? And I'm really interested in using glass as a means for exploring 3 dimensions. So thinking about how it can actually allude to something more 3-dimensional. Can it be an outline? Can a surface be built into a 3-dimensional object? So through my research, I developed 6 categories of line, and for me, that was just a really nice way to kind of develop a taxonomy similar to the way Tim Ingold had his taxonomy. It gave me a kind of framework to explore the many different facets of how I explore lines. So Katya's put up an image of one of the first series, which are called Tracing. So I don't have any of these works in the show, but for me, this was about using glass line as a way to capture gesture. So these were made using a vitrograph, which is just an elevated kiln, and the glass comes like a fine line at the bottom, and then I was able to kind of manipulate that into these sort of nesty, beautiful glass 3-dimensional drawings. So, and I have experimented a little bit with kind of flattening them out in a kiln and adhering them down to panels of glass. And it's very interesting that you can actually see the depth in the nest itself, even when they're flattened out. So it's almost like starting with 3 dimensions, flattening it down to 2 dimensions, but then by adhering it to a flat plane, it starts to become 3-dimensional again.
And Mel, where are you working here in this image?
So that image is at the art school, so at the Canberra School of Art at ANU.
Great.
So,
Okay. So we
so
are,
the,
sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, that's okay. So do we want to flip through into the show?
Let's do that. Here we go. So this is our title wall with the fold series images,
So, yeah.
with the fold series drawings.
So the drawings are part of a series called Transcribing. And what I'm really interested and looking for in these is using these flexible glass line drawings to demonstrate the potential versatility and mobility of glass as a drawing material. So I'm transforming a drawing into a solid, movable, and yet malleable three-dimensional object using heat. So I think eventually I'd love to find a way to actually not have them attached to a substrate, so have these movable drawings actually exist in space somehow. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but that's my aim. And so with the Fold series too, it was about that idea of glass being a really malleable object too, so it can be folded and manipulated, and these stark folds were almost like folds of paper. And just by using matrices of lines, you're able to see where they intersect and, where the lines intersect and create a third space. You're getting these additional geometric areas as well. And just by tilting them in opposite directions, they become very whimsical and have a sense of movement.
So I'm just gonna, for those of you who may not have read Mel's thesis, in her thesis, she actually divides the work into 6 categories. So the first one we saw, the gestural one, the nest-like one, is what she refers to as tracings. Is that right, Mel?
That's right. Yep.
Now tell us what the Fold series. What is that? What is that in your taxonomy?
So that's transcribing.
Transcribing.
So that's that idea of the flexible line drawings to demonstrate versatility and mobility.
And transcribing, yeah. And then here we see one more of the drawings on the right side of the screen. I hope it's on everybody's right side of the screen. Piece called
Transition. So that's so similar to what we saw this morning, but using a beautiful dark amber glass. So I have actually included a bit of color in this exhibition, which is, I guess it's a little bit unusual for me, but I was reading a book by Julia Barnes, who's an Australian journalist, called Phosphorescence, and it was kind of the perfect book to be reading while everyone's on shutdown. So it was about that sense of awe and inner sunshine, and looking for things and taking the time to look for things that actually bring you joy. And this was a color that I've always sort of dabbled with, and for me it's that true sense of kind of joy within glass. It's like liquid honey. It kind of refers back to the molten state of the material as well. So I thought it was a really nice kind of way to kind of bring in some of those ideas of awe and wonder as well.
The other interesting thing I think about the colored, these drawings when they're done in color, is that obviously it's like a shading of the color also. There's like the same sense that you get with maybe a cast object and light. You get a similar interplay with the number of layers in these pieces.
Absolutely, yeah. So you do get that shift from the density of color, where you have the one layer, and then as I built up multiple layers, you do get that density of color increase, which is really beautiful.
Great. And
it does give the pieces a sense of weight as well too. I found by using the color, they start to have a bit more of a base too, or the objects have a bit more of a grounding, which is really interesting. So you can see at the bottom of that gold print, it does have a thicker layer, which almost looks like where the object would sit if it sat in space.
Mm-hmm. And so should we move to would you like to talk about this, how the solids are are defined in your hierarchy?
Yep. So the solid forms I categorize as inscribing. So inscribing explores alternative theories of representing three-dimensional space on a flat surface and experiments with new ways of using geometry to subvert surface. So by flattening these objects out and then engraving upon them lines that give that sense of perspective. So, you know, there's a highlight 3/4 of the way around, and the lines then dissipate into the sides of the object. I'm giving that sense of space and volume within a flat form. So both inscribing and counterpart, which are in the show, have that sense of three-dimensionality within a two-dimensional plane. And both of them are sets of two. So what I really like about both of these works is that you can play with the transparent form and the opaque form to create new spaces by the way they sort of intersect and interlock as well.
This is the other piece that Mel is talking about here, which is counterpart, the black and white two-part solid piece here, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna go
So
back.
the black can sit behind the clear, and it can become that space within the object, or it can sit in front, and then the clear becomes that top lip of the object. So there's so many configurations. So really, with counterpart, I was thinking about like breaking down those linear parts of an object, the base, the body, and the lip, which are all really integral to how an object sits in space.
Okay, and should we move on to maybe is the capacity and volume and capacity pieces, are those the next?
Yeah, so they're part of the mapping series. And this is really where I started working within glass, so using blown forms and either mapping them with engraving, but more recently I've been using hot trails of glass. So thinking about the entire body of the glass as a vehicle to actually explore the dimensions and the linear quality of an object. So these pieces take their forms as blown three-dimensional objects and surfaces. This series explored the mass, the convex, and the space, the concave, volume of objects through drawing. By using continuous lines, both additive and reductive, on the interior, exterior, and the space between, so in the substrate, the work maps and defines space. So in this series, I've mapped the outside with trails of glass. I've mapped the inside with trails of glass. I've mapped the lip with a singular lip wrap. And I've also engraved the surface of one of the interiors. I've also, in the past, played around with keeping some of the interiors raw, so they're fire polished. So you get that sense of a never-ending space. In these pieces, I decided to go with a full matte surface because they very much are about mapping that interior, exterior space of an object. So, and it's really interesting, although the three are very similar in size, the way that if you map them on the interior or on the exterior with those linear marks, the volume actually seems to change dramatically.
Yeah, and the sense of volume also is heightened, I think.
It is, yes. And also the way that the objects are mapped through the use of line gives them that sense of sort of balance or imbalance as well. So they're all sitting on a slight tilt, and that gives that sense of sort of anticipation or a sense of, you know, that even though they are very still and quiet objects, they have a sense of movement and give that sense of, you know, it's sort of teetering on a moment before they kind of spill over into something else, which I quite like.
And once again, so tell us what word you use for this.
So that is called, that's mapping, that series.
Okay. And you can see the three of them here, a detail. And then we have the piece on the left, borderline, and the piece on the right, which is essentially a cast version of the Fold series, which is called Overlap. Is that right? No?
Yeah, so let's talk about Borderline first, because that's its own little series. And I call that series Highlighting, or Lightworks. And with this series, I was really interested in highlighting the unique properties of glass, which are transparency, translucency, and opacity, as a way of concealing and revealing space. Light and shadows were used to create a new volumetric windows. So what I've done with these pieces, and what I'm really interested in, is the way that you can layer up areas of glass to create new volumes within a two-dimensional form. So this is multiple layers of one color, which is like a light gray and white. And just by layering through the back of the glass, I'm able to create new volumes and then flatten it out in the kiln. I've also used small pinhole lines to kind of reveal some of those linear circles through the front surface. But what it is for me, they're very much about that sense of form moving into a two-dimensional space within the wall, and then being able to compress it through the glass. So that really light grey picks up any changes that sit behind it or sit in front of it. So they're almost like shadows behind that are cast through the glass to create that form on the surface.
Yeah, I will just say that this body of Mel's work is really difficult to photograph. The subtlety in it is pretty amazing in person, and it is difficult to translate it into an image. But to me, they all have this sense of light emanating from them.
They do. Yeah, so that the white that sort of pierces through that front surface really becomes almost like a neon light, white light that is in stark contrast to that grey. But it does really draw you in, and it does really look like a three-dimensional surface until you get up close and you can sort of see those multiple layers through the translucency of that glass.
I think that the way that your eyes have to adjust to these pieces and kind of keep in which they keep changing as we look at them more intensely reminds me of some of James Turrell's work almost.
Yeah. And you know, they also, I think you could think about people like Fred Sandback as well, that use very kind of stark linear structures to actually to kind of hone a space as well. So they do actually, it's almost like a borderline to another space which moves within the work as well.
Hence the title. Okay, here's the, is there one that we missed, one group that we missed, Mel, or did we?
Yes, so rendering, which is the overlapping piece, which is the folded piece. Last. So this series, rendering, are we there? Yep. Explores the relationship of space, line, and plane, using directional lines on two-dimensional glass surfaces, creating distinct planes that are established through the use of low relief and engraving to animate flat fields. Using logic, systems of progression, geometry, and mathematics, flat surfaces are folded into modular surfaces. So this piece is also really hard to see through a image as well, but essentially it's a rectangle of glass which has been folded over itself, and you've got these directional lines which give it that sense of movement too. Because I've used opaque glasses, unlike the folded series in the prints, you don't actually get to see what's happening underneath, but the directional lines do give it that sense of movement, and it almost looks as if the lighter side has sort of flopped off the wall and is now pressed down against the black. So again, using line to kind of animate a space, to create a sense of movement and to change direction.
Great. Well, that is a wonderful, here's a view into the exhibition with the reflection of the street in the door, which I love, bringing the outside into the inside. And I really appreciate you walking us through that. I'm gonna open this to questions and see if we can answer some. Maybe we will unmute everybody. If you want to. So there's praise for the cleanliness of your studio. J.G. Harrington says that.
Lewis is laughing as we speak. He helps me clean it up.
Lewis. And do we have any questions? Anybody have a question for Mel? Or did she completely explain everything? Yes, go ahead, Antonio.
Judy here. I'm just a fan of yours forever. Can you give people a sense of how complex this is to create in terms of time and your commitment to producing a display like this? Because, and the other question I would have is, how many times did you have to give up on a piece before you finally got to something as perfect as the ones that we're looking at?
So I'll answer, I think that was sort of almost 3 questions. So
Yes, it was.
So usually I would complete maybe, so what you can see at Hella Gallery was that's almost a year's work for me, and I work 7 days a week. I'm always sort of tinkering away at something. So it's a huge commitment, and a lot goes into every piece. So I would say I make a piece a month, would be right. And it, they're all physically hard, mentally hard, but I really enjoy it, and it's what I've chosen to do. So, and I learn something new every time.
Oh, no,
we have a few other questions here, so I'm gonna just jump in. Mel, Roddy and Steve Harris ask, does Mel do colors within the mapping series?
Yes, I do. So usually, I have done some with a transparent body, and then they have black and grey wraps, but I have done some other coloured series as well. So yeah, I always work with a very muted palette, but I am dabbling a bit with colour. And the pieces that are actually in Hella at the moment, the linear wraps do have gold over the top, so they are slightly amber colour as well.
Yeah, there's amber and gray and white and black seem to be sort of the main colors in this exhibition. And Antonio, did you have a question?
Yes, just one question. The glue that you are using, spray glue, how long does it last? I'm in the department of chemistry and glass and science, and which is connected with conservation. And this kind of glue, does it last a lot, or that's just a question.
So the rice paper glue is going to have the most longevity with adherence to paper. It also means that if the conservators ever wanted to remove the glass, God forbid, from the paper for any reason, they can. So they can actually dissolve the glue as well. So it's actually not affecting the glass substrate, and it's not eating into the paper. So it would be a maximum of, or a minimum of, sort of 50 years for it to be fine. But it's what they use for printmaking in any kind of shin collé, so using multiple layers of heavy materials, and it's been used in Japanese printing processes for many years, and they've really never had anything that sort of failed. But saying that, there's always a possibility, but for me this is the most permanent, safest way to actually work
so
with
it doesn't get yellow with the time, okay. It doesn't get yellow with the time.
Yeah, you're gonna have to just find out with time.
Yeah, so the rice paper doesn't yellow. The rice paper glue doesn't yellow like other glues do.
And there's two related questions here. One is from Stacy Katsias. Did you find it difficult to edit out so many possibilities of what glass can do in order to concentrate on one or two main ideas? And the second
Yes.
part of that question actually sort of is from Sandy Benjamin. What happens when you are tempted to change course rather than the wonderful way that you have followed your line and developed it further and further? So I guess one is, how hard is it to concentrate on what you're doing? And the other one is, what are your future plans and how do they diverge from the line that you developed?
I always have a little bit of experimentation and developing happening on the side. I'm always, like, I try and always put something in the kiln every day just that reminds me of some little idea that I've had. So I kind of almost have the two simultaneously ticking along at the one time. And, you know, sometimes it is really hard to remain focused. And going back to that first question, have I ever had anything that hasn't really worked and I've tried to push through? I had a series of works from the highlighting series, which are large scale, which I had in an exhibition last year, which took me over 6 months to get these 3 pieces right. And I just did firing after firing after firing. So it's about kind of working out, it's problem solving really, and then realizing where the glass will allow you to get to, and being able to kind of navigate through that. But really, I do try and work with both research and development and focus on my own body of work. And I think they do kind of diverge into one another as I progress.
So are you suggesting that those larger format ones did not really work out?
I got them to work, but it did take a very long time. So I learned a lot, and I had to push some of the sort of known rules I thought I had about glass, and you know, change the materials. You know, there are some materials that like to be fired a million times and some that don't. So it was just kind of managing what I could do. So, and also Bullseye is amazing for that kind of research and development. I often kind of tap into to their workshop just to sort of, you know, they can make sheets that are larger size for artists. They really work with artists to kind of get exactly what we need. So.
Okay. There's one other question here that I think has to do with whether the glass threads, like the ones that Tutsinski uses, are they at all, is that type of thread at all related to your work or used in the nesting pieces? And
yes, so yes, absolutely. So it's made from the same sort of machine. So I think she has a full mechanical kind of thread making machine, and her threads are often very uniform in size. What I'm looking for is that sense of like hand gestural, or that sense of movement and time. So they do come out of the same sort of machine. But I'm very interested in how I can sort of manipulate those freely rather than actually positioning them up and forming them into a vessel like Toots. But yes, it is a similar use of technique.
Okay. Well, our time is up. And I am just going to say thank you so very much to you, Mel, for spending your morning on a Friday morning to do this with all of us, and to show us and explain so much about your work. That was really amazing. Thank you to everybody. I'm just going to also tell you that there are so many beautiful comments here about how wonderful the exhibition is. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you everybody for joining us and spending time. If you have any other questions, please email us and we will forward the questions to Mel, and we'll do our best to get you answers to all of them.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you, Hella Gallery, for, you know, it's always very different to see the work in a gallery space, and I think you curated it in such a way that it really kind of, it has a beautiful story about that idea of drawing and perspective and sense of space. So thank you so much. And thanks everybody. Thanks Lewis for holding the camera.
Yes, thank you.
His arms are getting a bit sore.
Well, his time is over.
He's giving me death stares as we speak.
Anyway, thanks so much, everybody. Thank you to everyone in
Katya.
Australia and here in the United States and wherever else you're tuning from. And we will see you soon again. Bye.